We begin the current Daf Mesech Nazir Daf Lamed Dal. We begin all the way at the bottom of Daf Lamed Dal and Aleph, 4 lines up in the bottom of the Amud, where we begin now the sixth parak of Mesech Nazir, parak Shloisha Minim. Now we're moving on in this Mesech now to another half of this Mesech. Up until really this point, the first half of the Mesech was all talking about the Kabbalah of the Naziris. That was essentially what we're discussing up until now. Now we're discussing the actual halachas of the Naziris, as the first Mishnah is going to open up regarding what are the actual prohibitions of a Nazir. Something discussed in today's daf are, like the Mishnah is going to say, Shloisha min asur min Nazir. A Nazir is prohibited in three activities. Halacha of Tumah, he's not allowed to become Tumah from a dead person. Teglachas, he's not allowed to cut his hair. And number three, Hayitzim Negefen, he may not consume wine or any grape derivatives. That's the one from the pasuk B'chal Hayitzim Negefen. And also, the Mishnah tells us that the mitzvah and zemzeh, that all that comes out from the grapevine, they all combine one with the other. You don't have to have a kazayas of each one individually. We have machlekes of the Mishnah and Rabbi Kiva regarding the shiur for drinking. Is it a revius or is it actually even something less than that? And machlekes in the Mishnah and Rabbi Lazar and Nizir regarding what's chartan v'zag. And the pasuk says mechatzan v'zag. Machlekes actually had to translate those words. Machlekes in Mishnah and Rabbi Lazar regarding gef and atzma. What happens if you actually eat the grapevine itself? Are you also going to violate? Also, we have big regarding the midrash haTorah and the dreshes pen in today's daf regarding a pasuk that states a klal and a prat. So there's a Talmudic dispute throughout Shas. Do you say like Rabbi Eliezer that darsh ribuyu umute? Is it inclusionary and exclusionary, or like the Rabbanan that they dash what's called kloli and prati, general and specific, where although there seem to be interchangeable terminologies, they actually have differences in their methodology of what's being included, what's being excluded, and therefore it's going to have a different halacha, as we'll see in today's daf. Also, what's called a pratu klal. So here also Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, it's like a specific, which is a miyut, and then the klal, which is a ribu. So ribu hakol and a miyut. So only the most diverse pratim are excluded from the klal. So meaning you're really going to be including everything, and just you can exclude one thing. In contrast, the Rabbanan say nasa klal moisav ala prat, that the klal includes all pratim with no exceptions. It's going to be including everything. So that's one more area of differentiation between if you have a miyut v'ribu or a prat to klal, what you're going to be including from the second larger inclusionary terminology. Now, the other way, klal prat, according to Rabbi Lazar, atadein ke'ena prat, so it does not include pratim different than the prat. It has to be exactly like the prat is. According to Rabbanan, im b'chlal el b'masha b'prat, only this prat is included, all the other pratim are actually excluded. It's actually only what the specific, not ke'ena prat, that only the prat itself when you have klal uprat. Now, what happens if you have prat uklal uprat, a specific, a general terminology and the specifics? Rabbi Eliezer and the Chum agree at the dan ke'ena prat, then you're going to qualify so in that case, everyone's going to agree that it's going to be ke'ena prat. Now, what happens if you have what's the more famous one, the klal prat, the klal, it's brought many times in Shas, a specific, and a general terminology. According to Rabbi Eliezer, like a prat, the klal, it's going to be riba hakol umi, it's going to be including everything, and it's just going to have one exclusion. According to Rabbanan, it's going to be like a prat, the klal prat, which at the dan ke'ena prat, there is a slight difference between klal prat to klal and prat to klal prat. We're not going to discuss it in today's daf, but it's similar in that it's going to be similar to that of the prat. So we begin the current daf Lamed Daled, all the way to be on the bottom, on 4 lines off on the bottom of the Amud, the parak Shloisha Minin, Shloisha Min Asur min Nazir. There's 3 types of prohibitions that apply to the Nazir. Number 1, Hatuma. That is prohibited for him to become Tameh, like it says in Bamid Bavav, al Nefesh Meis Lo Yov. He's not become Tameh with a dead person. Number 2, Ba'teglachas. He's not allowed to cut his hair, like it says in the pasuk, Kaddish Year should be holy, Godel Peri, he has to grow his hair long. Number 3, Vayitzim Lagefen. What comes out from the grapevine, like it says, Anovim Lachem Veshim Lo Yochel, the dry and the moist grapes he's not allowed to eat. Those are the 3 prohibitions of a Nazir. Now, says the Mishnah further, whatever comes out from the grapevine, they combine with each other. In other words, let's say he ate a whole cornucopia of, he has grapes and dry ones and raisins and the grape seeds and the grape skins, where if he eats a kazayas from them all, he's this guy, the nibbler, the guy who goes, he doesn't eat like a man. They eat a little bit, they have this diet, and he eats a little bit of kazayas from them all together. He's going to get malchus because it says in the pasuk, it says from all that is including all them is going to be that violation. Now, but what's the shiur? So although the words are minanavim, it sounds like it's only from the grapes. We'll see on the Flameches Mabez. It's lav davka, but we use that example for a specific reason. But it really means from anything, whether all of them together or just grapes. But the liability, what's the shiur of liability? Although we know, yes, there's isser in even a minute amount, but the liability is only when you eat a shiur of a kazayas the size of an olive. Now, as you continue to base, that's regarding what's called solids. regarding foods. But as we continue to Beis, Mishnah Rishonim, as the first version of the Mishnah had said, Ad sheyishta deviyas yam. When it comes to beverage, when it comes to drinking, you're not liable until you drink a quarter of a loig of wine. However, Kiva may disagree. He says, no, I feel a shara pita beyain. Even if you soak your bread in wine, v'yesh b'kadei l'tzav kezayis, and you have enough wine that will be combined in the soaked bread, that it'll be the shiur of an olive, chayiv, you're going to be liable even for that shiur, that's the shiur of a kezayis. Now, moreover, continues the Mishnah, v'chayiv, you're going to be chayiv for malchus, ala yain b'fnei atzmai, for wine by itself, v'al novim b'fnei atzmai, if you took grapes by themselves, v'al chartzan b'fnei atzman, and on the chatzana by themselves, v'al zagim b'fnei atzman, and the zagim by themselves. Which Taisa says, it seems the primary chiddush of the Tanna Kama over here, what he's coming to say, is that the chiv is even going to be just on zagim by themselves. Meaning, if you only eat zagim, which that's a chiddush, because that's not really something that's usually eaten by people, and on that is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the next time, is coming to disagree. Elazar ben Azariah says, no, ein chayiv, you're not going to be liable just eating the chartzanim, shnei chartzanim v'zag. It's not enough. You have to eat 2 chartzanim. Now, what are chartzanim? Chartzanim are the seeds in the grapes, the grape seeds, and the zagin are the peels on the outside. He disagrees with Tanna Kama, says, no, you can't be chayiv just on eating just the seeds. You have to have, with the pasuk says chartzanim v'ad zag, so chartzanim is plural, which those are the seeds. Zag is in the singular, which is just the skin, as the Gemara is going to explain. So, as Toys explains, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds like Rabbi Yesi, which actually we have machlekes how to translate chartzan and zag. He holds chartzanim are the pits, are the seeds, and zag is the skin. So, only when you eat 2 seeds and 1 skin, then you'll be chayiv a kazayas to get malchus, not like the Tanna Kama that you can be chayiv if you just have that on its own. Now, actually, the Mishnah actually brings that as a machlekes. Elohin chartzan, elohin zagim. What are the chartzanim? When the pasuk says from chartzan to zag, you're going to be chayiv for the violation of yotzim nagefen. What is that translation? Says the Mishnah. The first opinion says chartzanim ela hachitzonim. That's on what's on the outside, the peel, the skin on the outside. Hazagim ela panimim. Those are what's on the inside. Those are the seeds. That's the Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yisrael, no, he comes to disagree. He actually translates the pasuk the opposite way. He says that actually the zagim that you said is the inside is actually the peel on the outside. And he says, and I'll give you a sign, not to make a mistake, kizug shel behem. We find that same word of zag, like a bell of an animal. Hachitz, on the outside of the bell, is zug, is called the bell, which is same by the grapes. The outside, the skin, is called zug. Panim, the inside, is actually called the imbel, which is the clapper, which that would be the seed on the inside. So if we have machlek is how to translate mechatzanim v'zag, what actually are chatzanim, what actually is zag. And we also have machlekes regarding the liability. Would you be chayiv just on chartzanim, or would you actually have to have, like the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, only if you have 2 chartzanim, 2 seeds, and zag, and 1 skin. Now, the Mishnah had said, as our Gemara quotes, shleish minim asurim benazir. We said there's 3 types of things that are prohibited for a nazir: hatuma, v'chulu, etc. Now, one of the things was hayotzim min hagefen. So it says the Gemara, it sounds like hayotzim min hagefen. What comes out of the grapevine is forbidden. But gefen atzmoi loy, the grapevine itself is not prohibited. For example, if a guy ate the leaves, grape leaves, or if he ate the grape shoots, from the fact that you didn't say a bigger chiddush, the gefen itself. When we say pri hagafen, we say what comes out from the gefen. But what's the grapevine itself? Sounds like you wouldn't be chayiv. Says the Gemara, so like Rabbi Elazar, a Mishnah must be not like Rabbi Elazar. The time like learn the Brayso, Rabbi Elazar that he says, Afila olin v'lulavin b'mashma. He says, actually, the prohibition includes even the leaves and the shoots, as the Gemara is going to darshan shortly. So it must be our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar, because you see that they're only saying hayotzim negefen. That's one version. Ikadam, those that say la asefa, they say that the dik that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar is from the sefer, because as Taisa points out, the dik from the Reisha is not true, because the wording of the Mishnah, when it says hayotzim negefen, could also mean the leaves and the shoots. It comes out of the grapevine. Question what you mean when you say the grapevine, but the leaves are coming out of the grapevine. So to the shoots are what is the offshoot. It's not the tree itself, not the branches themselves. So therefore this version says no, you have to learn this not like blood from the Sefer, because our Mishnah continued said, "Ein l'chayiv, you're not going to be liable elat she'achal b'anavim kazayis, only be eat from the grapes Now the inference is min anavim, sounds like from the grapes, yes, but ma'ageven atzmei, but from the vine itself, not. Must be not like Rabbi Elazar. It's not like in the brace. Rabbi Elazar says, even leaves and the shoots are included in the Isser. So either one, from the ratio of the Seif, you see our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar. It says, what is this machlek Rabbi Elazar and the Tana of our Mishnah? If the Isser is going to include Olin, leaves, Belovin, and the shoots, or not. So this is a Talmudic dispute of throughout Shas. Rabbi Elazar Darash, he expounds that when you read a pasuk, you read it ribuye umiute. You read it of inclusionary terminologies and exclusionary terminologies. Whereas Rabbanan Darshi, Klal and Prati, the Tana of our Mishnah, they darshan it in general terms and specific terms. So what does that mean? So the Gemara explains. Rabbi Elazar Darshi, ribuye umiute, he expounds it as inclusionary terminologies and exclusionary terminologies from this pasuk in Bamidbar. The pasuk in its whole says that from wine and from aged wine, miyayin v'sheicha yazeh, he should separate himself. Choymitz yayin v'choymitz sheicha lo yishta, the vinegar of wine, the vinegar of the old wine he shouldn't drink. V'chomishchas anovim lo yishta, and everything that's soaked in the grapes he shouldn't drink. V'anovim lachem v'veishim lo yichel, and the moist and the dry grapes he shouldn't eat. That's the whole pasuk. Now we're going to read this as terms that are including or excluding, as the Gemara explains. When it says miyayin v'sheicha yazer, from wine and old wine he should separate himself, that's a miyut. That's saying specific wine and old wine. It's specific terminology. Now, Tosfos is bothered. He says, "What do you mean? Don't we darshan these words already in the first paragraph of Dalmad Alf to say that why say yain, to say that even yain shel mitzvah is also like voluntary wine, and that the word shecher is actually teaching us the halacha regarding the base of Mikdash also says shecher." So it says, yeah, but the truth is, there's many terminologies over here, as we point out over here. There's a prat, there's a prat, there's a prat. We have many different terminologies over here, like it says miyayim shecher yazer, and it says chametz yain v'chametz shecher lo yishta, anav mlach v'eshim lo yochel. So he's not bothered by that. Okay, you show me that one of the pratim we dash him with something else. We have many pratim to start off with, so that's not such a kasha. But we start off the pasuk with a miyut, or exclusionary terminology. Then the pasuk continues. It says mikola sheyasa megefen hayayin, whatever is going to be from the grapevine. Oh, that's a riba. That's including like everything, whatever comes out. Mikol. Now, the next terminology of the pasuk of chartan ve'adzag, Tosfos says, as we'll see the next mandam darshans that Rabbi Elazar doesn't darshan it to exclude something like the Rabbanan, because he needs it for the teaching of Rabbi Elazar and Nazir that we're going to say shortly, that you're not chayiv until you eat two chartan and azag. So it's not utilized as a miyut, because you need it to actually teach you this actual halacha, what the pasuk is saying, that it's only chayiv with two seeds and one skin. So therefore he doesn't say any further. He's learning this as what's called a miyut v'riba. You start off with exclusionary, and then you have an inclusionary. Okay, what's the halacha when you have a miyut v'riba? Says the Gemara, riba kol. So that includes everything. So my riba, what are you including? Riba kol meli, we're including everything. And therefore that includes even for Rabbi Elazar, even olin v'lalavin, the leaves and the shoots. That, like we said, that this is the source of his teaching. My meat, so what is he excluding? You're saying a meat for riba. So you exclude only one thing, the most uncommon. When you learn the meat for riba, really riba is including everything. But the meat that comes first is excluding the thing that's the most dissimilar. What's that? Meat shavishta. It's excluding the branches themselves. The branches, not the shoot. The branches, those are the most unlike the characteristic of the grapes. And therefore that's what we're excluding. But olam alavan will be included. Now, what's pshat in Rabbanan? Why do the Rabbanan hold that we don't include olam alavan? Because they are darashi klali prati. They expound the psukim in a very different expositional methodology. They darshan what's called klal prat. What is that? So let's see again. Miyayin b'sheichiyaz, when it says from wine and from old wine he should separate himself, that's a prat, that's specific, you're specifying something. Then when you say a generic terminology, general, mikola shayasim, whatever is made from the vine of wine, that's a klal, that's a general terminology. Then you say mechartan v'adzag, from seeds up until the skin, well that's chazav apart, you're saying a specific again. Oh, this is what's called a prat, uklal, uprat, a specific, a general, and a specific. Which this is one of the Yud Gimel Midas that Torah is darshan, which is similar, says Tosfos, to klal prat the klal, but there is a small difference between those two midas, as we're going to write at the end of the sugya, says Tosfos in Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. So what do you do when you have a prat the klal prat? The halach is iyatadon elikeina prat. You don't say it's exactly what the specific is, but it has to be what's similar to the specific. Okay, let's look at the specifics that you mentioned. You mentioned certain specifics in the pasuk. So you're going to say, Mahaprat Mafur is just like the specifics that you mentioned. Are pri, upsailas pri. You're telling me cases of actual fruits and waste matter of fruits. as the Gemara is going to explain what those are. Okay, then av kol pri, so we could include what's ke'ena prat, what's similar to the specific, anything that's a fruit, which the Gemara is going to explain what fruit are we including. It's not mentioned in the pasuk. Is beiser, unripe grapes, immature, that weren't mentioned yet. Upsailas pri, and also waste matter of fruits. What's that? That's if you have a grape that got wormy. But what is it excluding? Alin v'ulolavin, because that's not similar to any of the pratim. Because olive and lavin are not a pretty. Upsailas pri. That's why the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Lazar. Now we understand the machlekes between our Mishnah and Rabbi Lazar. But the Gemara wonders and says, wait a second. Maybe you could say, according to the Rabbanan, the following wording. If you can tell me, just like the specific is explicit, that it's a pre-gomur. The cases that you mentioned in the pasuk were complete peiros. Maybe avkol pre-gomur. Maybe then you should only include also what's a complete pre. So what's the Gemara's question? Tosha actually brings two interpretations. Some want to say that the Gemara's question is like this. We should exclude beiser, because it's not a pre-gomur, didn't fully ripen yet. And we should also exclude grapes that got wormy, because it's not a complete pre. Tosha says no, that doesn't seem to be correct. First of all, he says the pasuk clearly mentions chaymet, vinegar, which vinegar is a psoilus pre. It's the waste matter, so to speak, scientifically, of a pre. So why would wormy grapes be any different than vinegar? It's also the waste matter of a pre, meaning it's deterioration.
But there's a big difference because it's a controlled deterioration.
I hear. Okay, you're having a lamdasha answer. I hear, but they're both psoilus pretty. Another question is that if you can exclude both of them, so what are we gaining by a klal prat? That what wasn't written explicitly in the pasuk. Everything else is already mentioned. And also the wording pre-gomer sounds like it's coming to exclude a pre that's not gomer, like beiser. But a wormy grape is not a pre that's not gomer. What? What? But that's mentioned in the pasuk explicitly.
Right. So in the pasuk itself it says.
Oh, you want to say that itself should include from Chatzan and Bazag that you see that it's not a pre-gama. I hear that you should include that. I hear. Okay. So another point. So Taisa says, therefore it seems Lamayri that you're right. The Gemara was saying that it has to be a pre. I mean, you're asking really on the Gemara, really. If the Gemara is saying it should be pre-gomer, you want to know how could the Gemara say pre-gomer? I guess because the Chatzan and Bazag are from a pre-gomer. It's the seeds or the pits, or the seeds or the skin of a complete pre. Meaning, doesn't mean that you have to eat the whole pre. It means it's from a whole pre. Beiser is not a whole.
Wormy grape is also.
No, wormy grape. That's what Tosha is really asking. But you could hear to say that it's not a complete pre because it's severmlich. It's not a ganz zach. Right, it was, but now it's not. The skin is from a whole pre. I hear. Yeah, there's what to be mechalik because when skins, it's still a skin of a pre-gomer. You're just not eating the whole. You're not eating the flesh of. You're not eating the buster of the actual grape, but it's the whole thing. I hear. That's a question that you want to know in the Gemara. How could the Gemara entertain pre-gomer if it's saying zagim v'chartanim? But Taisa ends up saying, he says, no, right. The Gemara's question is only when it's saying it should only be a pre-gomer, is saying that, okay, let's exclude the unripe grape. But you're right, wormy grapes, he says, we're going to include because it is ke'ena prat of the vinegar. But this is the Gemara's question. So that the Gemara says maybe exclude beiser. So the Gemara says, no, Amid, you're going to say no. If that would be the case, im kain, then what's the pasuk leaving for you in its understanding, meaning that you should infer from the klal prat, shlemer, that it wasn't already said in the pasuk, as the Gemara explains. Regarding anav lachmi veishim, regarding the dry and the moist grapes, haksivi, that's already mentioned in the pasuk explicitly. Yain b'chaim is regarding wine and vinegar, haksivi, that says in the pasuk. And then you can't say it the second way we said it. It must be like the first way that we said it. In other words, if that would be the case, that you would be excluding beiser, it would come out that everything else is explicit. So what nazirs would we be darshaning from the klal, a prat? So therefore, that's what the Gemara says, no, it must be like the first version that we said. That it's not a pre-gomer. But then the Gemara Taisa says, wait a second, why can't you say we're including wormy grapes that were not written? That's included from the prat klal. Says Taisa, no, because there's two pratim that I mentioned. It's very important, says Taisa. There's the pre and there's a psolis pre. Pre, which is the grapes, and then your psolis pre, which is the vinegar that's mentioned in the pasuk. So you have to include from every prat ke'ena prat. So therefore you have to include beiser from the prat of anavim and the wormy grapes from the prat of chaymitz. Okay, but we're excluding olive olavim, which is not ke'ena prat. But we couldn't say they're including only only one of them and not the other because you have two pratim. You have to say both of them in a prat. Now, says the Gemara, okay, wait a second. So if we're coming to include everything, as you're saying with the prat, basically everything's included. What are you really learning out from the last specific from Chartzanim up until Zag? Which Taisa says, wait a second, don't you need it for the last prat? Taisa says, yeah, but what the Gemara means to say is, why can't you write it before the klal? Why are you writing it at the end? That's Lemnechot to tell you, no, we had to write it at the end. Why do you have to write it at the end? Because to tell you, prat klal, anywhere where you find a prat and a klal, meaning in general, or let's say here by Nazir, if we had not written Chartzanim V'Zag, which was the last prat, you only had the prat and the klal, and it stopped there, you wouldn't be able to say that, okay, now that whatever you're including has to be similar to the specific. Rather, the klal would be adding on to the prat, and we actually add on almost everything. We would add on even the alin b'lelavin also. Oh, that's why until the pasuk is specific, where it says the prat after the klal. The way it was specific by the Nazir, we have the last prat, that's called a prat, the klal prat, then you're going to have ke'en prat. But if we didn't have the last prat after the klal, we actually would have only prat, and then the klal, we have to say chatzam azag at the end. Because or else it would be prat the klal, we actually would be including almost everything, even that olam and lovin. Now the Gemara goes back and says, Amamar. We said that in the Rabbanon, that we said that the klal of prat is not including olam and lovin. So the Gemara just explains, Amamar. We said ma prat mafurish. We had said, okay, just like the specific is a specific, that it's upsailis pre, it's the fruit and the waste matter of fruit. Those are what written explicitly in the pasuk. Of course, so too we're going to include kein the prat, upsailis pre, whatever's a fruit and similar to the fruit. So the Gemara just wants to define the terms. What's the pre that we see in the pasuk? Or invia grapes. Upsailis pre, what's the waste matter of fruits that mahi? What is it that we see in the pasuk? It's chaim. It's vinegar, as mentioned in the pasuk. Oh, now we can understand what's kein the prat. Av kol pre, when we say anything that's a pre that's being included, mahi, what's that? That's guharki, which Tracy explains that's boiser, that's the unripe grapes. It's similar to the prat, it's a fruit. But we entertained originally to say maybe it should be excluded because nagamar pre. We said no, that can't be. And when we say I've called the pselis pre mahi, what's when we're saying also whatever's the waste matter of fruits are also included because it's similar to that of chaymetz. And Rav Kahane says l'suya invi dichrin. It's coming to include the male grapes, which is what we call the wormy grapes, which is also waste matter of the fruit, similar to that of the vinegar. One last point says the Gemara va'ad zag, which Taisus gives actually is mechatzanim va'ad zag lomali. Why do I need chatzam va'ad zag? Which Taisus wonder, what do you mean why you need it? Well, of course you need it to tell you that the Torah prohibits even the grape skins and the grape seeds, even though they're not even fit to be eaten. You also need it to tell you you're going to get malchus, like the Gemara says later on chesam and beis. And says Taisus, and don't say that what we mean to say is the Gemara is asking, why am I saying it at the end? Why didn't I say it in the beginning? As you continue and Taisus, that's difficult because you already told me why. Because then you're not going to have the klal ma'asav they just don't have klal ma'asav product. You have to have a product at the end. So Taisus says the Gemara's question over here is, why are you writing chartzanim v'ad zag? What's this ad? Just say chartzanim v'zag. Why until? Oh, says the Gemara, Amuravina lasuya de bein habinaim. It's coming to include what's in between, which one pshat in Taisus is what's between the skin and the seed. That means the actual flesh of the grape, and that's what the pasuk means to tell you. Mechatzan v'adzag. What's between the skin and the seed is what you're going to be chayav for. It says Taisus, what do you mean? That's the grape itself. You already said a novim in the pasuk. You need chatzan v'adzag to tell you what's between them? That's the flesh. Then you already said that. So Rabbeinu Tam says a different pshat. It actually means the small grapes that's between the big ones that don't ever see the face of the sun and they don't really get so ripened and they don't really get so big. They're bein beinaim. They're in between all the other grapes. That's what the pasuk is including with the word of ad. But it says Taisus, why do you need va'ad to include bein beinaim? We already included even beiser, the unripe grapes, from kein prat. Says Taisus, maybe you could say that actually these are more inferior than beiser because beiser are just unripe, but they're going to end up being big. Here they're never going to end up being big. So if we needed ad to include, even those small ones are also being included. Or another pshat says Taisus, if we didn't have va'ad, we would have included bein beinaim from the kein prat and not beiser. So therefore you needed both to say that one's including bein beinaim, one's including beiser. Or another interpretation of Taisus, you could even say the first pshat, that actually bein beinaim means to say what's between the skin and the seed. But what we mean to say is, let's say you only scooped out, those people, those delicate people, they scoop out what's between the seed and the skin, a shiur of kezais, and he eats it, we're going to say he gets malchus, and we don't say what's called batla daidas kalabim because we wouldn't know that from the pasuk of Anavim that if a guy doesn't eat a grape, namal via mensch, that he's going to get malchus. Because this guy is taking off the skin, taking out the flesh, and leaving the seed. Even if he just eats the flesh without eating a grape like a namal mensch, that is what we're including from Chatzan Vazag. That's the Bein HaBinayim. What's between, yes, you wouldn't have known that from Anavim. That's a third interpretation. Thank you to any time for hosting us.